The question of the day, are cities required to have business plans? And the answer is yes. The foundation of this is known as the Critical Priority Risk Index, and the CPRI is a qualitative-based ranking system identifying the impacts upon the community assets and assess the vulnerability of buildings, infrastructure, and people, measuring the potential loss from these hazards, and ultimately you come up with a comparative analysis of these various hazards. Required by law, the city is supposed to have a business impact analysis done, and this would be done both from a qualitative and quantitative aspect. But the key point here that the city council needs to know and to take up is how big of a financial hit can you afford to take? This is the maximum financial hit, and this is the policy of the city. So the city council has to be involved in this and ultimately approve it. But let's look at the BIA analysis from a real world perspective. Let's say as an example, we have a restaurant and one of our servers happens to dump a whole plate of pasta on one of our customers' laps. Okay, so what would be the quantitative analysis? Well, quantitative is the direct immediate financial hit, or known as objective. So our hit here is the food loss, broken dishes, cleanup, and the client's dry cleaning, all the initial financial impacts. The qualitative is subjective, or all the secondary impacts, which would include the impact of dinner service, because obviously we've had to have the support staff from the kitchen come out and clean up the mess, and as well as the client's perspective, including those who have watched this. Are they going to walk away happy and going, okay, they took care of us, or are they going to walk away with, we're not coming back? This is qualitative and quantitative analysis. So the CPRI is the foundation for both the continuity of operation plan as well as the emergency response plan for the city. This is required under Homeland Security Policy Directive 7, which basically says if you're a local, state, tribal, or private sector organization providing critical assets to a government agency, you gotta do this. Critical task within the planning section requires the business impact analysis be completed. And within the planning section, it has identified 15 essential support functions. This is just a handful, including transportation, public works, etc. This is also mandated under state law under the California Emergency Services Act, which in short says you have to comply with the FEMA Community Planning Guide 201, which basically says you have to comply with all the presidential executive orders. Now, this has a financial impact upon the city. If we look at city responses, there's two types of resource requests that a city has. One is called automatic aid. This is typically a handshake agreement, or even it can even be written policy, whereby, as an example, if the Culver City Mall was being robbed with an armed robbery in progress, they would pick up the phone and call LAPD and say, hey, can you provide a helicopter? The other type is where specialized resources or large amounts of resources are requested because the city has exhausted all of its resources. This would be considered a local emergency. And in this case, you would have mutual aid. But the state and the federal government will reimburse the city for this expense. This immediately places this in jeopardy if you have not completed these requirements, because under state law and federal regulations, you are not eligible for mutual aid reimbursement if you're not in compliance. The second element of this is if you're not in compliance, you are not eligible for any grant funding. And the feds take this very seriously. There happened to be, matter of fact, a small fire department back east who ticked off the SCC a little bit. And make a long story short, not only did they get their communications equipment repossessed, but their FCC communications license was suspended. So this can get ugly. Now this is an example of a critical priority risk index, a segment of it. This is one that I did several years ago. It was with a large operational area outside the state of California and included tribal nations and military bases as well. But in essence, each department is supposed to complete one of these, and then you take the cumulative numbers and create one for the city. The first thing is you list out the hazards type, ranging from civil unrest to earthquake, pandemic, etc., and includes all the human factors, elements, including, say, the blue flu as an example. And this should be based on history. Typically want to look back 20 to 30 years, and like with Culver City, and back in the 70s, they had a trash truck strike. So this type of hazard or impact needs to be inputted into this chart. And then each event is identified in terms of, or ranked in terms of probability, severity, warning time, and duration, ultimately giving you a priority risk index number. Now, the CPRI category risk weighting criteria is recommended, but few people modify this. In terms of probability is risk weighted at about 45%, magnitudes at about 30%, warning times 15, duration is 10. Again, most people don't modify these numbers. Scoring goes from 0 to 4, with 0 meaning none. So for instance, if you're a one-room schoolhouse that has analog phones and no computers, IT issues are simply not a threat. So therefore, although you list out the hazard, it would be scored as 0. But the scoring goes from 0 to 4. The criteria that is listed here is not negotiable. This is set in regulation. The probabilities is range from unlikely to highly likely, magnitudes from negligible to catastrophic, warning time is from greater than 24 hours to less than 6 hours, and duration of the event is less than 6 hours to over a week. So with that, we now can establish the priority risk index for the specific type of hazard. If we look at this chart as an example, and again, this is a small segment of an actual CPRI, major fires and weather-related events are the two greatest threats to the community. So therefore, this now established where your priorities need to be focused. This is a strategy for both resource dedication as well as grant funding to support this. So in short answer, does the city require to have a business plan? You bet. And is this the foundation for it? Yes.